Ready to record. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here again for FCI Live 2024. We have a very exciting session tonight, getting to the root. We have had record registration for this, and we raised the limit of on the registration, and they broke that too. So everyone's very excited to be here for this topic. I'm glad you could join us. Just before we jump in, we want to real quickly thank our FCI Live champion sponsors, Colluminate and National Club Grocers. Without them, the series would not be possible. So we deeply appreciate them. So with us tonight, having a conversation, a community conversation around the role of community organizing in startup food co-ops. This really hasn't been talked about enough. I think it's the story of many people I know who have organized and been a leader in a startup food co-op that they never even heard the term or really understood the term community organizing, and certainly didn't know that's what they were doing. And that it was a whole practice with a whole bunch of wisdom and a whole bunch of history behind it. And then they found out later, oh, that's what I was doing. So this is kind of a conversation that's long overdue, and it's one that Amaha, Darnell, and Bonnie have all brought up. It's really core to what we're actually doing, and yet we don't talk about it in this movement. So we asked the three of them to, with their years of experience in community organizing, in food co-op organizing, and organizing in general in communities, to come and have a conversation about what are we talking about when we talk about community organizing? What is its role in the startup movement? And this is a new conversation. So we asked, at least in our movement, so we asked them to come and really have that conversation kind of in front of us. You just share, these are three really deep thinkers with a lot of experience, and talk about what they think about this. Because we asked them to do specifically that, come have this conversation kind of and let us witness and be a part, we're not going to do a lot of Q&A. There may actually be no time for Q&A at the end. You are welcome to use the chat to talk to each other, to point out things that you heard that were exciting, to add your thoughts to the conversation. Talk amongst yourselves, keep the conversation going over there, but the speakers will not probably have any time to kind of jump over there and include those things into the conversation. So it's going to be a little different than folks are used to, but I think you are going to absolutely love it. So thank you to Darnell, Bonnie, and Amaha for being here. So glad to have y'all here tonight. And I am going to hand the facilitation floor over to Darnell.
Thank you so much, JQ, and thank you all for coming. Super excited about this conversation. And I think I want to start off by saying, first of all, my internet somehow is unstable, it says. So, so the Zoom gods may decide to boot me out at some point. I will come back. The conversation can happen without me because Bonnie and Amaha has some amazing things to say. So first, I just want to say that. Secondly, I just want to give appreciation and thanks to FCI and specifically to staff, JQ, Michaela, and Faye for the opportunity to have this conversation. And for all of you for coming out, I really appreciate it. We'll start by way of just introductions. My name is Darnell Adams. I am a co-owner of Firebrand Cooperative, which is a worker co-op, a consulting firm. Some of you may know me by also facilitation of peer groups for FCI, and I am also the board chair for FCI. So lots of FCI connection and just love for the organization, so much so that I want to give the time and energy to it that I can through board service as well. Also, I was a organizer for Dorchester Food Co-op based in Boston, opened this fall. And I was an organizer years ago, back in 2015, 16, 17. And so there's some tales from the streets of what did it really look like. But before that, we're going to frame out the conversation. So we're going to do introductions first. I'm going to let Bonnie introduce herself, Amaha, take the introduction from there, and then also like frame out the conversation that we want to have today. We'll go ahead, Bonnie, with your introduction.
Thanks, Darnell. And hey, everyone. So glad to see you all here and to have this conversation. Every time I talk with Amaha, I take 50 notes because I'm like, yes, yes, yes. So glad to be here. I work with Darnell with Firebrand Cooperative. I do independent consulting there, organizational development, technical assistance. I'm lucky enough to be one of the FCI peer group facilitators. So glad to see some of you in the monthly calls. And in before I did this work, I was a project manager to open a food co-op in southwestern New Hampshire. And so gained a lot of experience, did the thing that JQ said, like community organizing without realizing I was community organizing. And so really happy to have this conversation, and I'll turn it over to Amaha.
Greetings, everybody. I'm amaha sellassie from Gem City Market in Dayton, Ohio. And yeah, I'm so excited for this dialogue. Like when we did like an intro call, I was like, well, I wish we could record this because it was like picking Bonnie's brain and Darnell's brain was like fire. So I'm excited for this conversation today, in part because we're going in a little bit different direction than like the normal conversation. I think Darnell is going to explain more about in a minute. But like, so Gem City Market, we are 15,000 square foot grocery store with like 8,000 retail. And took 5 or 6 years journey to go, and a lot of it probably was based upon like organizing. And so yeah, I look forward to sharing and learning. And yeah, that's about it.
Well, I'm looking at my notes. So we did a prep conversation, a prep call, the three of us, last week, and Bonnie was so kind to take notes, and I'm looking down at the notes, and I see one bullet that says Darnell tabling, blah blah blah. So I think that was my cue to start framing out what a conversation will be and will not be tonight. So the tabling, blah blah blah, meaning yes, something like tabling and many of the things that the activities that we do in order to organize and to talk to our communities are important. And so I don't, the blah, blah, blah part, it's important. We'll talk about that. But what we kind of came to agreement on is like the philosophy, your understanding, your energy, the reason why you're actually organizing is more important than and then I set up tabling, events here, and I give out this pamphlet, and the pamphlet says this, and the logo says that. Like, all of that is important, but first is this conversation. This conversation that many of us didn't have in the beginning and maybe kind of stumbled into it, where we would just want to have it here. So tabling, blah, blah, blah. But what is the deeper understanding of what we are trying to accomplish? And that's what this conversation is going to be about today. So I want to actually send this over to Amaha. And we were talking about cores, like 3 cores of community organizing. And I'm wondering if you have kind of further thoughts about that you could share with folks about what you're thinking about cores of community organizing.
Yeah, I think like kind of Darnell's point, like part of it, like the intention behind like the vehicle that we create, I think is oftentimes more important than what we're actually creating, because it's like the underlying foundation and assumption, right? And so to me, like participation is a huge part, right? Like how do we create space for people to participate and co-own their journey, right? And I think part of it is looking at the so I'm gonna talk from like the area that we did the Gem City Market in was red line. So like that's a like specific type of environment of like intentional underdevelopment, right? And in areas that's been underdevelopment, there's like this sense of like trauma that comes from that, because we've been overpromised and underdelivered for so long, right? That we don't know like can our actions actually create something different, or are we stuck with what it is? You know what I mean? And so part of like the participation is like, how do we create this sense of ownership that like we actually can make a difference and like build power to like shape the things in our community, right? And the more that we understand our power to change our lived environment, the more hopeful we become, you know? And then that in turn invites us to put more of our gifts into the center of the circle, right? And so like participation, I think is a key principle, you know, and along with participation is trust. You know what I mean? Like how do we trust the people? You know what I mean? Because movements move at the speed of trust, they say, right? And so like how are we developing trust in an area that is often untrustful? Meaning that like, you know, people are fighting and they're competing instead of like creating a different container, right? Where we're acknowledging that like we actually have a shared future. You know what I mean? That like we built our market in West Dayton. So like West Dayton has a shared future with each other, regardless if we want to work together, we don't like each other, whatever. You know what I mean? Like we still gonna be on this boat together, right? And so like we can intentionally cooperate and work together towards achieving something, or we cannot. You know what I mean? And so I think like knowing that we have that shared future invites more cooperation, right? And invites us to like build these deeper relationships and like to build deeper trust, you know? And funny enough, I would actually say like making the language line up with whatever your North Star is, right? And what I mean by that is that like language precedes social transformation. And so like the language that we're using to describe our shared context matters. You know what I mean? If it's a rural area, if it's an urban area, if it's a suburban area, what are the underlying conditions that are calling for a market to exist? And how are we framing it in a way that people can develop a shared identity around like food and around like the need to have it, right? Because I think it's that shared identity that enables not only solidarity, but it allows collective action, you know? And so I would say like those are probably my three main things to start on. Oh, you're on mute.
I think those things are enough to kind of fill the time, right? Because all of them in and of themselves can be topics on to themselves. But one thing that we were talking about, and Bonnie, I'm really interested in what you kind of you sharing a little bit about the community in which you were organizing in, but also you've been working with startups for quite some time, with all sorts of different stories. But kind of this idea of like how you see, say, participation and trust and language kind of playing out. Like, what is your story? Like, how did those interactions happen for you when you were organizing?
Yeah, Amaha, you just laid such a like rich, fertile ground to build off of. And I think the point about trust is essential because you could almost swap in the word community with relational, right? Like community organizing, relational organizing. It is all about the building of relationships. And it has to be authentic. That is not something that can be transactional. It's not a checklist, right? It's not a spreadsheet. It's how are you building transformational relationships in your community to solve a problem together? Because the co-op, like, I know it sucks to consider this, but what if your store doesn't open, right? And what change are you making in your community in this moment? Because the entire process of organizing, though we all want to get to that end, right, where we're opening a successful, thriving store that's meeting all these needs, you don't have to wait to this end grocery store because you can transform your community throughout the entire process of your organizing. And that gets back to what Amaha's saying about, what has been taken from us and where do we reclaim our power? And I found one of the things as a project manager who was like working way too many hours and working 3 jobs to be able to pay my bills was I just was like trying to be efficient, right? And at one point I just stopped and reflected and I'm like, damn, I like literally started seeing things as like transactional, and I was aware of it. I was like, oh, I was like nerding out, oh, we have to get to these membership numbers. And I lost sight. I remember being like, I can't meet with these volunteers to write thank you notes because I have to do something else. And it was this aha moment for me of like, but that's what this is about. This is about relationship building. This is equally as important to doing what I thought I was going to do to bump up those numbers, right? Like the really quantitative stuff. And so I would say, you know, if you're in that spot as project manager, it's like sometimes quicker to just do something yourself, right? And you can get stuck in this cycle of being like, well, it's going to take too much time to train up volunteers. It's going to take too much time to do this and do this. And so I had that realization to be like, it does not matter. This is really core. I had a couple of those moments in the 4-year process of organizing, which felt super fast. It felt super fast. And you know, but to be like, what pulls us back to be like, do we share this together in all aspects of how we're opening this co-op? Because one thing that really gets in the way is the concept that we are fed in this dominant culture bullshit, right? That it's like, do it as an individual. Individualism, rugged individualism. This is the way we accomplish things. Only one person can do it by themselves. And we have to unlearn that stuff. And it takes all these just layers of peeling back the unlearning to be like, no, that's what we have been told. We will go further together. And that's going to take time. It's going to have like uncomfortable conversations. It's going to have uncomfortable situations. And all of it is worth it because that really, these relationship building is the entire purpose of what a cooperative is.
Well, I have a question here because I can kind of feel it like in the, you know, between the internet, where I'm sitting here, folks being like, okay, fine, you want to send, you know, thank you notes to volunteers. You want to, you know, kind of have these deep, you know, relationships that take the, you know, the speed of trust. And also, right now, our community this is not a want, it's a need. There's something that we're trying to address right now. Right. And the sooner we do it, the less suffering perhaps there will be in my community. So how do we balance the, okay, this is all great, let's do relationship, and the fact that we're trying to get to this aim to hopefully build a store sooner rather than later?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that's why I love when Bonnie kind of like she kind of like opened up the the box, right? So I was like, yes, you know, because I think on some levels, right, we're talking about different value systems, you know, like the current status quo, you know what I mean, which Bonnie laid out, I think, beautifully, you know what I mean? It's about rugged individualism, independence, you know what I mean? That like survival of the fittest and all of these things. And so like that is like a transactional type of relationship, right? But like, you know, there's an African proverb that says, you know, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. You know what I mean? So like, how are we changing the infrastructure and the environment, you know, to be conducive for building a market and building other things? Because like once you get the ecosystem together, it's not limited to just building a grocery store. It's like what is next, right? That's why at Gym City Market, we said it's more than a market, but a movement. Because we wanted to signify that like the market is a piece situated inside of larger community transformation. You know what I mean? And so like, how do we become the protagonists in our story? You know what I mean? And I think that's like by how we define like what are our values and what is the relationship that we're trying to do, so that like we are literally like challenging the dominant narratives that like keep us out of a place where we can like I would say bring our gifts together, right? And I think the relationship part is so important, and it gets missed because like the deeper the connections we have, the more that we have the power to create our own social wind, right? Because part of this is like, how do we bring our gifts together towards building the market? You know what I mean? Like as we started building the market, people that were they had experience in building things, people that had experience in marketing, they added their gifts to like help co-create the market, right? But you got to create that space where the gifts can bounce off each other, and the gifts coming together actually creates community power, right? Like the latent power in the community gets released as the gifts come together, and that's what I call it, a social wind. You know what I mean? Like how we can like shift the patterns in our community. Right. And that's why I think like having this notion of quality over quantity is so important. You know what I mean? Like the depth of the relationship, right? Because like, sometimes communities, when they're building a grocery store, especially if it's a long time, they cycle out. You know what I mean? Like a group that like helped start it, you know what I mean? Like they kind of like reach their peak, and then there's a little bit of transference between like a new group and the old group to kind of pass, and it goes like that. And so like that piece of like how we work together matters. And I think it's super important to understand that we have a shared future. Like if we were to look at like we're building a cooperative, right? Which was like Jamila, I love how she says like, it's a association of people, you know what I mean, that are working together, you know what I mean? And so it's like being able to create a container where people can work together towards a larger project is so important. You know what I mean? Because like you're not going to get it with just two people trying to build a grocery store. You know what I mean? Like it takes a lot of people from a lot of different places. So how do we create that space of belonging where people have the trust to put their gifts into the center of the circle? You know what I mean? And that was one of the things that I think we had to fight in Dayton in the beginning. I mean, everything from, they're going to steal the money because like they've seen money get stolen. And you know what I mean? Like that's the reference point that they had to deal with, you know what I mean? So we had to fight those narratives of common experiences that people had, and we had to heighten the contradiction to show that like something else actually is possible, you know what I mean? And so that was another reason why participation is so important, because the more I see myself participating in the process, right, I have that sense of ownership, and I'm becoming more leaderful as a community instead of just three people that are like the spearheads and everybody else just like, you know what I mean? And so I think all of that leads to like the environment that enables a grocery store to come together. That's why I think, and another thing I want to say, I know I'm kind of rambling, but that is that sometimes we see, I'm a public sociologist, right? So sometimes we see structures as being like benign. Like, structures are structures and they have no whatever, but every structure has an adjective, meaning that like there's an underlying idea that is then shaping how the structure works, right? Because structure is ideology plus resources. So we have an idea, and then we use our resources to make it happen. So if we want to redline a community, we say that like white is superior, black is inferior. And then we say, because of that, we are going to put resources in the white community. And so by doing that, we actually created this thing on the earth that creates this separation and like underdevelopment and development, right? When it was all based upon the idea that we put our resources to, right? So I think part of this work of cooperation, especially in a capitalistic environment, right, is shifting the cornerstone to that we're interdependent. King calls it a single garment of destiny, right? That our futures are tied together, or African philosophy will say Ubuntu, that my humanity is known in the presence of your humanity, right? But it's this thing that like, we have the power to self-determine in our community, but it's going to take like us working together. You know what I mean? That like understanding that our gifts are for each other and not to compete and try to outshine each other, but like how do we put our gifts together towards building something like the market's the biggest thing I've ever done in my life. You know what I mean? It's like so like how do we work together, But it's small when it comes to community development.
Well, I want to put some questions back to you, because I think you, to the both of you, because we're talking about things that, I truly believe clearly. I wouldn't want to have this conversation if I was just like, I don't believe in any of this, right? And it all sounds nice, but like practically speaking, what did that mean? So the moment, Bonnie, that you were aware that you were like, I got things to do, I just need to finish this conversation. I need to hand out this pamphlet. I need to do whatever it is. And you've moved away from now building relationship to just ticking off a box. Like, what did you practically do to change your behavior and also show up for your community in such a way in which they could also be in relationship and not transactional? Like, can you recall what happened?
That's such a good question. I think what I did, it was like get the layer under, right? To be like, well, what's going on? Why do I feel driven? It's more like of a fear-based reaction, right? Like not going to hit those numbers, whatever it was. And I thought about the people. I thought about the people that I was working with. And then I thought, well, I'm feeling stretched too thin. What am I doing? And I was like, and then I started thinking, like, am I holding on to too much? And am I excluding people from taking ownership of moving us forward? And so what I ended up doing was like calling there. We had this awesome, like, I forget what we called it, membership and outreach committee or something. And I was like, we need more volunteers. Let's have a volunteer night. And they took it and like we ran with it together. We had a volunteer event and 70 people came and 12 people joined that night. It was new people. It took a ton of time. This was like one of 2 events we did in a year, right? It was a big deal. But it was like, it was that moment, Darnell, of wondering, of being like, why? Kind of like examining why I was having that reaction and then being like, well, there's too many things on my plate. So we got to share, right? We got to move and find more people to share that because it's really tough. Like I was the only one being paid. And I was getting, the way I was getting paid was bumping up membership numbers and using equity or getting like our budget was like almost non-existent, right? So figuring all these things out, but also understanding that, okay, well, if we need more volunteers, building up the base of volunteers takes a long time. And so it's going to take a lot of ideas together. So we had this idea. I called up some co-ops. We were lucky enough to have established food co-ops around us, called up some co-ops. They delivered amazing food, always feed the people, right? So they came, we ate amazing food. We talked about it. We did like these activities where it's like, what lights your fire, right? Are you don't do data analysis and enter membership numbers if you hate spreadsheets. Don't table at a farmer's market if you don't like talking to people, right? So just figuring out sort of like what Amaha was saying, like what are people's gifts and what are the gifts that they want to give to the project? And then how do we make sure that we're reflecting that and building up systems so that people can bring their gifts forward?
Yes, I love that. And like one of my favorite examples of this from the market was our groundbreaking. Because like typically at a groundbreaking, right, you have 4 or 5 elected officials and they got their shovel and there's people looking around, everybody clapping, this, that, and other. But like we knew that like the only reason we had a groundbreaking was because of the couple hundred people that like had worked to make that happen. So at our groundbreaking, everybody had a shovel. We were like Oprah, And so like because of that, right, it was that sense of ownership. They're like, yo, like we did this, right? Because I think part of this work is expanding our we, that it's not on contingent on a couple people, but it's like, yo, we did this together. So we're going to celebrate this together and we're going to take that next step forward, you know what I mean? Together, And so like, how do we shift that? Because that is a different logic system, you know what I mean? And I think like leadership development is key, right? That like organizing is about developing leaders. You know what I mean? Like the more that you organize, really, the more the paid organizer, whatever, is supposed to be in the background because it's like the goal is however you're developing leaders. If it's press conferences, if it's this, if it's that. You know what I mean? That like leadership development is the key. You know what I mean? That like people have that sense of ownership, and we are very decentralized, which might not be there's pluses and minuses to that, you know what I mean? But and I think the other piece that I wanted to touch on that goes with this is, I think it was Bonnie that like coined it in our pre-session, the oatmeal versus liberation. Right? And so it's like what is the reason why we're building the co-op, right? And so like in rural areas and in Black areas, you know what I mean? Like the logic is based upon like necessity and survival. And like, it's not just something cute that we want to make, you know what I mean? But it's literally like our kids are not eating, do not have access to healthy food. We got to spend 3 hours in Dayton to acquire food, you know what I mean? At least, you know what I mean? And so like that liberation, that survival is a different assumption that leads to like different ways that we move and we see people and this, that, and the other, you know? And I think like that's the thing that like the co-op world right now, especially the food co-op world, is kind of wrestling with, because like there's been like these dominant assumptions of how you do things, but like the context is different, and we can't cookie cutter from one context to another context, you know what I mean? And so like that's why we're seeing this shift, you know what I mean? And like, you know, at up and comings, I think we're witnessing it more and more, right? How like a different underlying assumption is kind of rising of like how we do these co-ops, right? Because most of co-ops are right now are like in areas that like need co-ops, you know what I mean? And so it's like what does it mean to like organize towards liberation? You know what I mean? And like for me, I've noticed that like when we organize for liberation, there's some type of, I want to say, spiritual component to it. Like you're drawing on something deeper, because it's like you have to, the well that you're coming from has to be stronger than just like, you know, like when it's something that we want in a great way. Like when we're talking about like how we're changing the future for next generations, and how like we're like recipients of like all the struggle the elders have done. Like when we situate ourselves inside of that, it's a different type of like energy. It's a different way that we see each other, you know? And so it's like, it's a different way that we operate and we move and we organize, you know what I mean? To build things that are going to last, you know what I mean? That are going to help us move forward. You want to say something, Darnell?
I'm still here. I was
Okay.
gone for a minute. So sorry about that, but I did hear everything. And I'm really curious. We're talking about like, it's not a cookie cutter type of situation, right? Like all these different communities that are even represented on this call, very different in many different ways, with different histories and different levels of organization that's already in place, or different levels of trust or infighting or any number of things and resources. Bonnie, can you talk a bit about your particular community in organizing, specific to how it was that you would come up to understand what your North Star was? Like, what was the thing that the community wanted, so much so that they were willing to put, you know, all their time, their resources into making this thing happen? And was it, as described by Amaha, something that was, this is a matter of like how we were going to survive, or was it something else that was driving?
Yeah, great question. I think for one segment of the community, it was about survival, and that was the farmers. And so the seed for our co-op really germinated from these community-based conversations that were organized by a conservation district, where there were a lot of farmers that were like, our kids, the average age of the farmer was like 56 or six, you know, somewhere between 55 and 60. And there was 70 active farms in the region, and they had no idea. The farmers were like, we don't know what people want. Our kids don't want to take over the farm. We're going to lose these farms. They're seeing farmland developed and taken over. And they were like, we have, you know, what are we going to do? And that's where the seed kind of germinated. And so there were people there that were like organizers, farm system advocates, all these things. That's really what it was about for the region. And then as the conversation, so because I was born in a community that had a food co-op, I'm like, well, the food co-op would be a great place where you're connecting people buying the food and the people growing the food outside of just like a partial year farmers market, right? And there's much, and part of what co-op staff did was like, someone said, I have an idea. Do you think this will work to produce, you know, turn my vegetables into a value-added product or do something like that? And that the co-ops were actually incubators for farmers. And so that's really where the conversation started. But then when we started talking with the community, there were a lot of people that were like, this isn't about, I care about the farms, I care about the food, but for me, it's about trust in the food that I'm giving to my grandkids who both have chronic illnesses. And our kids are really allergic to red dye, right? And we don't trust when we go into the grocery store. So it started, right? The conversation started really with the farmers and being like, we need a year-round stable market. But as it grew out, these other aspects that I think unite a lot of us building food co-ops came forward. Like, we don't have a community hub. The word hub kept coming up, like a place where we can convene, a place that is away from where society is headed, right? Where it's about knowing your neighbor, it's about how we show up for each other, it's these social connections. So it really started with this vision that for the farmers, it felt like about survival. For the people that were brought into it, it was not the same, obviously, situation as Amaha's describing, right? It was more like, hey, these are the other reasons that this vision is attractive. And so the vision was built over time, but from this year-round stable market for farmers and place where people can access this food all year. That's kind of where it stemmed from. And that, I think the conversations around throughout the entire process another thing that came up is like jobs, right? That was another core value that came up. Like, I was going to school and I noticed that everyone from my school was leaving the region. They were going to Boston or going to other big cities and they couldn't find jobs. And so that was another thing that was kind of a core value that as we got out to the community, it was like, oh, younger people started getting involved and they were like, we want more stable, good jobs in the region. So that's sort of, it grew organically, and the vision really started around the need that the farmers were expressing, the unmet need.
Good. Yeah, I appreciate looking at the need, and that's where I think like Dr. Jessica Nimmer, I always shout out Dr. Jessica, right? Like she in the Collective Courage book, you know what I mean? Like she really gave us a formula of like how this has worked in the freedom movement, right? Which is like self-determination is like community transformation coupled with economic development, right? And so like how do we create jobs and how are we also like developing our North Star that we're pressing into, and how does like the economy that we're developing catapult us into this North Star, you know what I mean? And so like I think like having our collective hope is important, you know what I mean? And then showing how like building these co-ops is like developing the economic engine to kind of set the trajectory for us to get there. And that's where self-determination comes in, because without it, you know what I mean, we can, like I used to be this all on the community side, you know what I mean? And like, I didn't want nothing to do with no economy, nothing like that, you know what I mean? But it's like we're spinning our wheels, you know what I mean? Because like you need that economic driver, you know what I mean? So like, what is the adjective behind the economic driver that is aligning us with the North Star and giving us the trajectory to go deeper into like actualizing? And that's why I think it's like that's the self-determination that comes when the two are brought together. So how we're creating these jobs and also community transformation simultaneously. And that's like a different way of understanding, you know what I mean? Like even like this year in Dayton, you know what I mean? So, I'm co-ED for Co-op Dayton too, which is a whole next conversation, right? But it's like this year is like how are we connecting with more and more people that they understand that like we need both. Like we need to be like drivers of our economy while we're simultaneously creating together what is our collective hope. You know what I mean? And we need those together. You know what I mean? So like for me, like I think co-ops are one of the greatest ways to create beloved community. You know what I mean? Like how are we going to create the space that like centers human dignity, you know what I mean? And create space for us to come together to like interconnect and meet each other and to work together towards creating a glimpse of what we could like live into more in the future. Because sometimes we just need to see the glimpse that something is possible that we can then like go into it and be like an invitation for others to come into it. You know what I mean? And so it's like, yeah, I think all of these things, like to me, like food co-ops can serve so many different ways, you know what I mean, as we're also increasing access to fresh fruits and vegetables, you know.
So as you're talking about this, I want to go back to how you opened Amaha and revisit this with both of you, because I think this is something that doesn't get spoken about a lot as well. So you were talking about participation, language, and North Star. We've been talking about that mostly, and then this idea of trust. And I think about trust in the many forms that it could show up.
Mm-hmm.
Trust in each other, like we're gonna trust each other as we do this thing, and like trust in the possibility that it can be done, that there's hope.
Yeah.
And that there are many communities that lack or struggle with hope in both forms, right? That we can do something together. And also, if we try to do something together, something actually is going to happen because there's so many years of trauma and things not happening to benefit the community.
Right.
So I want to like at least spend the last part of the time that we have together talking about trust. And what does that look like in communities that are struggling with it? And how do you go about organizing in those situations?
Yeah, like I'm gonna try to get into the space a little bit a roundabout way, right? Like I think like part of it is how do we understand the context that we're in? So like when we first started organizing, food desert was like the popular lexicon, and which implies natural. And I think on some levels, like what we are doing is like we are challenging the imagination of like that is like maintain the current environment that we're in. And so part of that is being able to see that like this actually is a product of someone's imagination. It is not natural, you know what I mean? It is like human imagination that has underdeveloped our communities, you know what I mean? If it's rural or urban or wherever, And so like from that, it's like the ability that like, oh, that like we can reimagine it, And I think that is like such a key piece because if we realize that we can reimagine it, all of a sudden that we are becoming the drivers of like, what is this future we're creating together, And I think that is key, you know what I mean? And like, they say trust is a fragile bridge that you build each day. You know what I mean? And so that's why like the depth of the connection is so important, right? And so one of my mentors, Peter Black, you know what I mean? He will talk about that like we have to spend time imagining what it is we're trying to move into. And it can seem like we're moving slow, right? But it's like we have to be able to feel it, taste it, smell it. You know what I mean? Like we need to like know this thing, like not like to every detail, but we got to know like what is this North Star, right? Because we're going to meet opposition along the way, right? And oftentimes what determines if we succeed or not succeed is if the opposing force is greater or lesser than the force that we have accumulated to allow us to move forward. And that force is by the strength of the connection, right? And so like the stronger we have a connection, that trust, right? That like when we meet the obstacles and roadblocks, we are able to press through because we've built this deep connection. But if our connection is weak, like I've been to places where, people decide they want to do something, and like that same day they say, okay, well, I'm gonna be the president, you could be vice president, you know what I mean? Like we break up into all these things, and then like 2 months later it's already dissipated, and then somebody will come like 2 months later and be like, man, remember that thing that we were trying to do? Let's try to, and we get in those cycles because we haven't spent the time to build the deep relationships, and we haven't understand like Adrienne Marie Brown will talk about the critical connections are more important than critical mass, right? And so like the strength of the connection is what enables us to defeat the energy of the status quo that's going to come against you, you know what I mean, as you were like you're challenging it, you know what I mean? And so it's like, systems fight against systems. And so like to build a strong system that can like show something possible that is like beyond the status quo, you know what I mean? Like we need that deep relationship as an ecosystem.
Yeah, that's it. That's it. And I think one of the things in terms of your question of trust, Darnell, it's like we as an organizer of a co-op, you're going to have, I don't even know, I can't even count the amount, like a million decisions to make, right?
Yeah.
And who are you thinking about when you're making these decisions? If you are privileged to have other people's trust in you, and that you are representing the need of the community, if you're on the board or your staff, right, you are going to have to make some decisions. And how do you show up, and how do you hold and reflect the community in this decision-making process? And it's really kind of like show me, don't tell me, right? And Amaha, what you were saying in the systems, I will say the more successful, I want to hear if this happened with you too, Amaha, but like the closer you get to opening your doors, the more people are going to come knocking at your door and saying, ooh, I have a really tantalizing offer. Come under the wing of our nonprofit. We're going to make it so much easier for you. I literally was backed up against a wall physically at a chamber of council meeting by someone that's like, you need to stop organizing right now. You're taking away, people will come, they'll threaten you, they'll try to entice you into something else. And to be able to be like, no, this is our vision. This is our North Star. This is where we're going, I think becomes really essential. And so understanding, is your vision really a reflection of your community and who your community is essential, right? Because if your community is a very limited slice, if it's people that are your friends, right? And it's just like, and everyone and it's kind of, you're at that limited growth stage where you're 300 members or less, right? Then your community is not, that's a slice of your community. Where is the rest of your community, right? Like figuring that out and figuring out why that is, who's missing, so that you're able to then have a vision that's reflective of a larger shared need, so that you can make, as someone that has been empowered to help make decisions to move your project forward, be able to say yes or no. Like, this deviates from our shared collective vision. So I'm going to say no so we can say yes to these other things. And that's the hardest part, right? It's so easy as an organizer to get distracted by either people threatening you, right? Or being like, no, this is not going to work because of this. This is not going to work. You're never going to raise that amount of money. You're going to hear it from city councilors. You're going to hear it from the mayor. You're going to hear it from every level. Maybe not. Maybe you're lucky enough that you're going to have people that are like, you're hyping in your corner already. But usually it's not how it starts. Usually you have to relationship build, and you have to demonstrate that you can be trusted to get to that next level. And I think it is through those actions, and through, instead of just saying no, being like, no, because this is the vision, and that's going to steer us off the path of that vision, right? It's always about something larger. It's not about one individual making a decision ever.
Yeah, no, that's real. Like we experienced it a little bit differently. Like we didn't have, like, in the beginning, I mean, in full transparency, I think there was people that, like, in the beginning said it couldn't happen, that then, like, as the momentum grew, you would have thought they, like, invented the idea. You know what I mean? So it's like people started jumping on more as it came. But we had to fight that initial inertia that, because our community has so much trauma. We were the first development project in probably like 20 plus years in our community. So like there's like a lot of like starts and stops and all of those things that we had to like fight against. You know what I mean? So I'm not even like, I get it. You know what I mean? And but it's like, so we had to fight against that, like that initial inertia, and like as people started to see, and especially like when they saw that, like, oh, we're actually about to break ground. I think like that was the part where, like, oh, this is really going to happen. You know what I mean? And so like that showing that it was possible then started opening people up more to like, oh, we can actually do this, and then more people started coming on in, which is great. You know what I mean? Like you want to get to that point where people believe that like change is possible. And I think that's why, like, when we opened, like, we were doing tours, like, before we actually opened the doors, and people would cry. And like, I still haven't fully understood why, but I think that was part of it. It was like, man, like, we actually did this. Like areas where we didn't believe that change was possible, we know the community has the power to create change. You know what I mean? Which is like astronomical. You know what I mean? Like, cause nobody gonna free ourselves but ourselves. You know what I mean? So it's like the more that we know that like we have the ability to be the protagonist is critical.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with this story as well. And I think Bonnie and JQ, over the years, you've heard this one, but so, and when I was hired as a project manager for the Dorchester Food Co-op, they had stalled in terms of membership growth. And it was like, well, we can't grow more members. Like, we got the people who were initially like, understood what we were doing and they're down with it. But, the rest are not going to really trust or believe that anything is possible until the store is open. And I was like, well, I'm gonna see. And what I did run up against was a lot of mistrust, a lot of anger. But I would say before that, it was kind of like this curiosity that I had, which is, wow, it really seems like there's some parts of this community that should be down with this. I'm unclear, why aren't they part of the co-op? Why aren't they champions for the co-op? Why are they, who's not here and why, I guess is really the easier way to say that. And so I started doing just sort of like my own, let's just kind of map out who's around, who I could speak to, and had some really uncomfortable conversations with folks who were telling me things like, I don't trust you all. I don't believe this can happen. Or you all are doing this and really it's only for you. I mean, any number of things, which some of you have probably heard on this call, like you're going to take the money for yourself, all the things. And I was committed to hearing every single thing. And in that, I could understand the mistrust and try to rebuild relationships. And there were some things that I had to admit prior to when I came on board, but I kind of took it on the chin, was to say, I could see why you wouldn't trust us. And maybe you still won't, but can I continue to have a conversation with you and let you know what's going on? Just keep you in the loop. And people would always say yes. And so it was like the long road to repairing relationships came with me first saying, I'm going to just listen, even if it's hard and even if it's tough and even if I think it's unfair. And somewhere in there were some nuggets of truth that we had to do better. So that's my story. And I'm going to stick with it. But again, this kind of centerpiece for our organization or organizing, which is like, what's going to come at us and how can we as organizers be prepared, or at least be in relationship with each other to be able to kind of withstand some of the things that are coming at us.
Like, I think I'm gonna use that as a segue, right? To like, like, what is the season we're in right now? I think like different seasons are conducive for different types of action and movement, and I think like one thing that like I remember I was on a call with Dr. Jessica and I asked her like how do we like get into the space where like we know that we know that we know, or something like that. And then she was like, we got to move from aspiration to acceptance, right? And like I think like I've been pondering that for like 2 years now. You know what I mean? It is like, because that is like the shift. You know what I mean? Like how do we get from people saying to like, oh, in the kumbaya by and by we can do this, this, and this, into like, no, like the actions we're taking right now is like building that next thing. Because like it's a huge breakthrough to move from aspiration into like acceptance, or like aspiration into like what we are building now. It's a paradigm shift, right? The paradigms are about the dialogues that we're having. So like when we're in aspiration, it's a different than a dialogue that when it's like in acceptance of like, this is what we're doing. This is the context that we're in. And it feels like right now, and I know like, there's evidence to say otherwise, but it feels like there is like a wind or a push towards like we're on the offense right now. Like those that are like seeking human dignity, those that are seeking to be rooted in love instead of fear, you know what I mean? Because love is a natural offspring to cooperation, right? Because like as we know that we have a shared future, we're interdependent instead of independent, then it's like, oh, we have to work together. You know what I mean? Like our choice to cooperate is our social choice. You know what I mean? Like nobody's hindering us from greater cooperation than us seeing ourselves as part of like a thing. You know what I mean? And so it's like how do we shift with the season that we're in right now? You know what I mean? Like how do we establish new cornerstones or underlying assumptions? You know what I mean? I think that all of that is like the critical work that we have to do as co-ops, and not just individual as co-ops, but like lately I've been talking about like what is Hope's story? Like in Dayton, we see there's so many great things happening in Dayton. You know what I mean? So like there's a story, like that's Hope's story. You know what I mean? Who's gonna tell Hope's story? Who's gonna say all these great things that are happening are actually interconnected together in some kind of way? Like how we build an ecosystem that shows that like, oh, the status quo does not have to be what it is, that we're showing what is possible. We're building something compelling, you know what I mean, that people want to join, you know what I mean? Because like we gotta be the invitation into the spaces that we're trying to create. We can't just talk about it, you know what I mean? Like we gotta like live into it, you know what I mean? Invite others to join us on that journey, you know, so.
Well, I'm thinking that this is the kind of space that creates the Hope story. Right. So I think when I was first organizing, there was and probably even up until recently, a lot of it was like, let's talk about the nuts and bolts. Like this conversation today would have been all about like, what do you bring to your tabling event?
Yeah.
How do you find, or what do you find?
Knock on doors.
How do you find new members and all that? I'm not saying it's not important, of course, but like this conversation was not something that was readily had and found, at least in larger groups, right? That we're kind of really getting to another level of saying, to define for ourselves what we're doing, why we're doing it, with whom, and in which quality, in which way we're doing it, right? Like, so that we're showing up. I don't remember talking about love 5 years ago. I don't, right? Like it comes up in conversation all the time now with you and others. So that there is a way that we're in the middle of we're in the middle of defining what the season is.
I say.
Something's different. Something's happening, probably in reaction to where we are right now, you know, with the country, with what people are suffering through, what people aspire to. We have 1 minute left. I went by like that. But I want to give both you, Bonnie, and Amaha a chance to kind of, if you're going to leave the one thing that you want someone to take away from this conversation.
Bonnie can go first. I talked a lot today. So yeah.
Yeah, what would it be?
I mean, Amaha says something, and I think part of it is like the dream, right? It's like hope. And that we have, I don't know how many of you all have used the word dream when you're talking about the co-op, but it really does. It feels like a shared dream and a possibility which we cannot see. Some of us can see it, but right, we can't imagine it, what it will look, smell, and taste like until we get further along. But like believing and cultivating space so that we're carrying forward that dream together and bringing it into a reality. And that it really is an antithesis to capitalism. It's an antithesis to grind culture, to take the space and to build the relationships we need to create that frickin' dream and to make it happen. And that's all I'm going to say. Pass it to Maha.
Ashe. And I think like when we say we are the ones we've been waiting for, like I'm going deeper into what that means, that literally we are the ones we've been waiting for, right? And so like how do we create spaces and belonging to create to where it's more conducive to put our full gifts into the center of the circle? Like what are we waiting for? If not us, who? And if not now, when? You know, so the fierce urgency of now.
I want to turn this back over to JQ, and also want to just say, I'm always honored to share the space, to be able to have these conversations with you. And I'm so glad for everyone who was part of this. Chat was active. That was good. I was keeping an eye. I had to, it was too good. So I try to weave some of those things in.
I got ADHD, so I've been doing a little bit of both.
Yeah, right. I was like keeping one eye. JQ.
All right. You guys who know me, I never let sessions go long. I let this one go long. I think you all know why. That's the first time I've ever done that. I want to give our big, deep, heartfelt thanks to Amaha, to Bonnie, to Darnell for having this conversation with us tonight. I know we all wanted to jump in. We jumped in the comments. And I'm sure this conversation is going to be coming up again. Clearly, it's super important. I'm not even going to put our closing sides up. So what I'm going to say is please do take the survey. You're going to get an email to you, or it's here in the comments. It just takes 1 minute, and it's how you can pay us back for the series, and because it tells us what's good, how to make this better, and it helps us stay funded so we can do this for free. So if you guys could just fill out that survey, we deeply appreciate it. We've got 3 more excellent sessions tomorrow. We hope that you guys will all be there with us. Our speakers, I do not believe, can stay. I'm going to stop the recording here, but those who want to stay and talk a little bit longer, I will hold the space